womp womp. And then the fish said, womp. Streamer fishing can be one of the most exciting ways to fly fish, especially for targeting bigger fish. But you know, there's different thinking and tactics involved from maybe what you're used to fly fishing. So we're going to talk about how you can increase your chances of success with streamers by covering water, by targeting the right kinds of water, by understanding predatory fish behavior, and by using the right gear. So the first point that I want to make is the biggest factor that's going to determine how successful you are with streamers is how much water you cover. A lot of people associate streamer fishing with float fishing, which is a great way to fish streamers because you're automatically covering a ton of water. But you absolutely can have great days streamer fishing on foot. You just have to be focused on covering water. So what do I mean by covering water? I mean that when I'm streamer fishing, I'm walking a lot. I'm trying to fish as much of the river as possible. When I'm streamer fishing, I'll typically cast to a specific spot only once or twice, and then I'll move down just a little bit to the next spot. When you're streamer fishing, those flies are pretty big. They're moving around in the water. You can be pretty sure that whatever fish are in there notice them. So you don't, if a fish didn't move on it, you don't need to keep casting that same fish because he's probably not going to move on it later. When you're nymphing or dry fly fishing, a lot of times you can kind of post up in a spot if you know there are fish there and spend some time kind of trying to dial it in. With streamer fishing, that just doesn't seem to be the case. If a fish isn't moving on your fly in one spot, you're probably just going to want to move on to the next spot. So when you're trying to cover water streamer fishing, one of the things you can do is break up the river. So I'll typically, when I'm walking up to water like this, fish the stuff that's closest to me first before I step into it and scare any fish away. And then I'll walk out and start casting a little bit further out into the middle. You can do a little bit of casting upstream, and you can also do a little bit of casting downstream or letting it swing downstream of you. And once I feel like I've worked that pretty well, I'll cast a little bit further out. Make sure I'm working that middle section of the river pretty good. Then I might take another step out and just keep covering all sections of the river. And I'm just progressively going to pull more line out, cast a little bit farther, so that for whatever fish might be holding in different sections, I can make sure they're going to be seeing my fly. This brings me into my next point, which is the types of water that I like to focus on when we're fishing streamers. It's a good idea to cover as much water as possible, and fish can eat a streamer from anywhere in the river, but there's a couple specific things I'm typically focused on. I like to think of them as ambush spots. So these are spots in the river where predatory fish can hang out without exerting too much energy and ambush their prey. These are spots usually along the bank where there's a decent amount of structure and the current has been broken up. There might not be much current at all. It might not be very deep either. A lot of times it's just a foot or two of water. There might be an overhanging tree or a big boulder that makes it a good hiding spot for them. One of my favorites are undercut banks. So when I'm covering water, I like to kind of key in on those ambush spots and try to make sure I'm getting my fly right in front of them. So there are two kinds of fish. There's non-predatory fish and predatory fish. Once trout get to a certain age and size, they stop feeding on the insects as much and they start looking for bigger meals. So that's what leads to them inhabiting those different types of water and having different behavior. They're not going to eat as frequently because their meals are bigger and they're going to spend more time resting or just waiting in ambush. Those fish that you can see feeding in the traditional trout water that we're normally looking for typically aren't going to be predatory fish, and they're very unlikely to move on a streamer. So don't waste too much of your time casting to those fish, getting frustrated that they're not eating your streamer. The predatory fish, you're not going to be very likely to see. They're hiding. They're in different spots. So just trying to cover as much water as possible and paying attention to where those ambush spots are is what's going to lead to your success. There simply just aren't as many of those predatory fish in the river as there are of those non-predatory fish. And that's why streamer fishing often comes with fewer fish days. But that's also why it's so important to be covering as much water as possible when you're streamer fishing, because you're pretty much just trying to find those predatory fish that are going to eat your streamer. And once you find them, you can be pretty sure they're going to move pretty quickly on your streamer, and it can be a lot of fun. Okay, so I just caught a beautiful brown trout, and he was a great example of predatory fish behavior. I caught him over here with this structure under this tree, in these rocks and this fallen branch. So I cast it as close as I could possibly get to that fallen branch, and I think he was hanging out right underneath that branch, and he ate my fly almost immediately. So that's what you want to be focusing on while you're fishing streamers for predatory fish, trying to get your fly as close as possible to those ambush spots. And if you found a predatory fish, they'll usually eat that fly almost immediately. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the gear setup that I would recommend for streamer fishing. First of all, your rod. You're probably going to want a 9-foot 6 or 7 weight. Usually a stiffer, faster action rod is going to be best. And then for your line, I really like using sinking lines for streamer fishing, even though I'm not usually fishing that deep. That sinking line is just going to help keep your fly in the strike zone of the fish for a longer amount of time. And they're usually a little bit better at casting bigger, heavier flies. Off of my fly line, I like to use a very short leader when I'm fishing a sinking line. So it's usually only 4 feet. I'll make my own leader just using 2 feet of 20-pound fluorocarbon, and then a micro swivel, and then 2 feet of 0x from there. And my fly goes directly on there. That shorter leader with the thick butt section is a lot easier to cast than a longer leader. And it also prevents your loop-to-loop connection from coming through your guides very often, which is pretty nice. For your fly, I would just say don't be afraid to go pretty big. You're trying to elicit that predatory instinct out of predatory fish. So it doesn't hurt to go bigger than you might think you need. You might actually be surprised how small of a fish will eat a giant fly. I've seen 12-inch fish eat 7-inch flies. So don't be afraid to go big, and just be willing to change up your pattern to see what they might be more interested in on any given day. So in particular, what I've got today is a 9-foot 7 weight, very fast action rod. I have a sink tip line with 15 foot of intermediate sink tip, and that's going to that leader that I was talking about with 2 foot of 20-pound fluorocarbon, a micro swivel, and 2 foot of 0x. And I've got a nice big white streamer on there. Streamer fishing can be a bit of a leap of faith. It can be kind of hard to believe that a fish you can't see is going to come out of the woodworks to eat your 6-inch fly. But once you see it happen a few times, you'll be absolutely convinced, and you might be addicted. This is a great time of year to start putting some streamer days in. The water's starting to warm up and the fish are becoming more active. And when runoff is happening, streamer fishing can be a great technique when nothing else is working. If you have any questions about getting your streamer game dialed, check out our blog post on anglerscovey.com or come into the shop and we'll be happy to walk you through everything you need.